Thank you for joining me. It's Monster Monday. I am DBJ, and today is yet another Demi Daily deep dive with myself, and we as we gather with friends and just talk about all things RPGs and gaming and a tabletop. But of course, each day is a different subject, and today, of course, is Monster Monday. So, I like to take little things, go deep into them. You know, get a little nitty gritty, come up with some really cool ideas, and just share them with everybody out there. So, in the title, I wrote "Class as Creature" or "Creature as Classes." So, what exactly am I talking about? Well, sometimes we can get stuck as a creator, as a game master or dungeon master, and making making NPCs, especially using class features. You start getting higher level, it can be very, very difficult. So, a good suggestion is just use a stat block from a creature. And instead of just using the stat block from the creature, we can actually start to shape their culture and their behavior just from using the stat blocks, without necessarily translating the exact creature to the human beings or humanoids in your world. All right, so let's get a little more specific in what my intention is and what my meaning is, and then have some fun with it. So let's take something simple like a kobold or an ogre, or some other kind of humanoid creature, or um, I always relate them to like goblinoids. They're all like kind of grouped into that same thing, like bugbears and gnolls and all that kind of stuff. Even ogres and hill giants kind of fit in there too. So take something like that, right? And then start to shape their culture around it. So let's take kobolds. Kobolds are known to be, they work in mass, they make traps, they work together. They're like the little dog-like lizard people that swarm in big groups or whatever. So maybe there's a culture that has to survive somewhere. They're beset by enemies at all sides. So individually, they're weak, but together as a group, oh, they work very well together. You can picture yourself like a Viking culture where they make shield walls and they work together, or they all get together in mass and practice archery or throwing javelins or something, or they use pikes and they make like a phalanx and just like slam their pikes into the ground to keep everybody away. And maybe the community, whether it's a big city or a small village, is surrounded by these intricate traps, and the children are able to make these small traps to capture like rabbits and squirrels and field mice. But the adults, they have to capture saber-toothed tigers or owl bears or displacer beasts that roam around their community, and the only way they can defend themselves is to make these traps and such. But you can start doing this with so many other things. Like, for example, let's take something bigger, like an ogre or a hill giant or stone giant or a two-headed Etten. And you're like, well, how does that translate? How does that translate into a humanoid type person? Let's say there's just a community of like elves or humans or dwarves, but you give them the abilities of like a two-headed Etten. Well, maybe they go on these quests or this training. So instead of them becoming like fighters or paladins, they go through a very rigorous and an intense training period. Maybe they go off on their own, or they're blessed by the gods, or this is a training period that's also kind of got an arcane bent to it. And when they are finished their training period, now they are tough and powerful. And like the two-headed Etten, they can't be surprised because they have two heads. So maybe they don't have two heads, but they're able to spread their attention around, so they are never surprised. Maybe they never sleep, and so even when they sleep, they are actually still awake, watching out for the community, and so they cannot be surprised. And maybe they use giant weapons, or are extremely accurate in the use of their weapons, and seem to have this supernatural ability to strike hard, strike vital areas, and also maybe they are trained to take on larger opponents, because in the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, although there are different class sizes, like large and huge and small and tiny, it doesn't really have that much of an in-game effect. So you don't need to make the human being, just because the creature stat says large, it doesn't mean you need to make it that way. Although you would need to foreshadow the abilities, especially if the player characters are very low level against a very high level opponent. Meeting an elven guardsman that has the abilities of an Etten in your 2nd level, you're going to get your ass kicked. And so letting them know that there are these legendary warriors that use stabs or rods, or you don't even need to leave to be a blunt object. It could be a sword and just change it. Oh, instead of doing bludgeoning damage, it does slashing damage, or whatever. You can reskin anything. But specifically what I'm talking about is taking the actual stat block and just transferring over into an NPC. But there are many creatures that have one or more multiple abilities, and we can start moving them around. So like I just wrote some random things down, like a basilisk, right? So let's assume that there's a community where they have the ability like a basilisk. And if you're not sure, it's like a lizard-like creature that can look at things and turn them to stone. Well, or petrify them, I guess. So if we start changing that around, maybe they are a martial community, and with a simple touch or strike, they can actually like paralyze people. And instead of making it a petrification sort where they turn to stone, they just cannot move forever. They're like in a permanent state of stasis. And it could be that these people can live very long, but they live their long lives in this permanent state of stasis because they're able to do it themselves. But with their enemies, they can use it as a weapon as well, and just capture their enemies by, being very, very zen, being very centered. And when they are attacked, they're instead of having a basilisk's hardened scales, they can just block attacks with their forearms and the palms of their hands. Maybe they have like a stone skin training ability that has allowed them to block those attacks. Maybe they have learned from lizards, and so their open hand attacks are like claws, and then when they scratch or touch, they can petrify the person. Now, of course, basilisks can do this at range, so maybe there's an arcane ability for these people. Maybe they're dwarves, mountain dwarves, and they have a strong sense of druidic culture in their community, and in that community it's very earth-like, so they can actually look at opponents, cast their gaze upon those opponents, and then turn them to stone. Live and Let Dice says Displacer Beast as a class could be a martial arts style that obfuscates the form of the fighter practicing the art, and they get the ability that way. Absolutely. And could you imagine? I mean, yes, you could make it very direct, like these people have learned a martial art based on the Displacer Beast, or you could just completely separate the two. You don't have to mention it at all. But I could imagine that there are these martial artists that always seem to fade away in the corner of the eye. Like if you try to take a look at them, but they're never quite there. Or they may seem distracted, but in reality, they are always prepared to fight. And the Displacer Beasts are fast. They have like tentacle attacks. So with the shoulder tentacles, maybe they are these chain weapons that they use, like a Kusurigama or something, or a whip, or ropes, or something that lashes out. And so they can use these lashing attacks when people don't expect it, because their enemies can't see them or can't quite focus on them, and then they strike with these rope-like attacks, rending the skin. And then when they get in close, they have these like the ability to like lock joints. So instead of like a claw bite attack, it's like they can lock people's joints in and break them or rend flesh with their bare hands. That would be awesome. But of course, if you want to be real direct, have them wear robes with the Displacer Beast as a symbol, like printed on the back of their robes and whatnot to show, or like a chest tattoo, like Iron Fist from the Marvel comics, where this is how they become that art. Or maybe they have to face down a Displacer Beast that is like in the wild, or maybe they hold them as kind of a sacred or holy creature amongst their community. That would just be awesome. And then of course their enemies have to be Blink Dog fighters too, right? That just like pop around the woods or Mountain Haven or something like that, or even in their city, and they can just a blink of an eye, like blink, 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 just move around. And you can of course use their alignment too. Like Blink Dogs are supposed to be very lawful and good, and Displacer Beast evil. So that would be awesome. Although you could absolutely switch them around, right? There's no reason why you need to even leave the alignments anywhere in there if you're just using the stat blocks. So having it would be very hard to keep track of a Displacer Beast, Blink Dog war going on, and the player characters are in the middle as these rivals attack each other in the city. Live and Let Dice says this discussion gave me the idea of a shaman ritual for tribal NPCs that kill a monster as a rite of passage to gain their abilities. Nice. Absolutely right. So now here we have. Remember, sometimes we get locked into this idea that we have villages in a medieval society, and for some reason, everything outside their society is just completely unknown. Oh, it's a creature, we need help. And then they have no idea what those creatures are. And that really doesn't make a lot of sense immersively on a large scale. People would know how to deal with oozes and giants, and even the rare fiend or aberrant creature or shape changer, because they would come in contact with them possibly multiple times in order to learn some ability to relate to them. So if you have a community that deals with these monsters on the outside, they absolutely have a shamanistic ritual to fight these things, using real life as an example to merge into your world. Human beings have always confronted things that they didn't understand, whether it is the idea of like fighting a lion or taking down a mammoth, or going after a silverback gorilla, or taking out a python or something. Confronting our fears is a big thing, and once people are able to not just confront them but overcome them, to wrap themselves in the very thing that would harm them, makes perfect sense. So having a community or shaman ritual for tribalists where they kill what's something like whether it's, let's go with like I don't want to go so far like a dragon, not yet, we'll get to dragons in a minute. Let's go with like I don't know, giant frog, right? You can say the giant frogs are out there and gobbling up their people. They live in a swamp. They go after the giant frog. They slay the giant frog. Maybe they take its heart out. The shaman goes through the ritual, and now this person or these the greatest hunter now can leap extremely far, can hold his breath for hours on end, can hide and sneak in the water, just revealing his eyes just above the murky waterline, and then uses vines and ropes that are braided in the community, and can, instead of a tongue lashing out and grabbing someone, it can actually use the ropes and grab someone, grab them by the feet, boom, pull somebody down. I think like giant frogs can actually swallow people, but instead of swallowing them, maybe the hunters have these like murky traps, almost like a pit trap, but instead of it being a nice smooth pit, it's like pulling them down into like quicksand or like sludge. And so now the warriors now are these people that can leap amongst the trees, swim in the murky waters, can go unseen. They wrap their opponents limbs around, pull them into these murky depths and have them suffocate, or even pulling them down and only their head is exposed, and then they can question those individuals as needed. And of course, this entire time you're just using the stat block from the book, but they can have have a lot of things. Hey, good evening, DBJ from Australia. That's what Jared says. Evening. Okay, so it is 8 p.m. your time, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember before. Jared. So yeah, thanks for joining me, man. Yeah, we're just talking about turning creature stat blocks into NPC abilities, literally turning them into a class feature. So let's say you have an urban area. Chrissy Rand says, just joined and still mystified. I'm hoping that means mystified that you're up at like 12:30 midnight tuning in, or I hope you're not mystified in what we're talking about. We're just talking about turning creatures into classes. So the idea, how about we take like, we have an urban environment. You need to make thieves, killers, assassins. There's so many dark creatures like shadow demons, cloakers, chokers. So okay, let's go with a choker. A choker is a smaller challenge rating creature. It basically is like humanoid. It seems like it doesn't have any bones in its body and can just wrap people, hangs in the rafters, wraps people around their throats and pulls them up. That makes a perfect assassin ninja styled NPC, especially if there's this town or major city where there's like, it's nearly lawless. You can pretty much get away with murder as long as you bribe the officials, or there's a certain part of town in the bottoms, and it's always dark and murky down there. It's the smell of despair and feces and urine, and some of the people learn the skills like a choker, grabbing people around the neck, or like a garrote or a garrote, using a wire or something to choke people, or just even ropes, and they just lash the ropes around people, pull them up into the rafters, rob their bodies and leave their dead bodies hanging around. Maybe they grab these people from the sewers and grab them from their ankles and yank them down. Absolutely, there could be like for a very low level game, there could be a Jack the Ripper type killer based on it. And then for lieutenants, you may have a cloaker. So instead of the creature that hides as a cloak and then has a big monster's maw in it or something, maybe they're a little more like a ninja type class in your game. So they walk around just like your average person. Maybe they do wear a cloak, a storm cloak to run under the eaves at night. But when you challenge them, they have like this supernatural ability to like float through the air. They're like cloak fighters, right? And then they can like jump from rooftop to rooftop, floating through the air. And they use like maybe wind fire wheels or something like that, or hook swords and fight. Jared says Pathfinder had a racial trait that would apply special monster features or bonuses for PCs raised in monster societies. Absolutely. Pathfinder is very good at being able to, because it's very modular, as opposed to 5th edition, which doesn't have as much granularity in it. So in a pinch, you could take a monster and just turn him into a class. But if you want to really deep dive into turning the minutia of character and monster and class creation, absolutely go to Pathfinder. The only Pathfinder gets a bad rap because of its granularity, and I think that's because of so much of it falling on the dungeon master, game master side, because they have to police the modifications that are done by players who are trying to game the game or game the game master themselves, trying to sneak something in that maybe the game master didn't want in their game, or stacking abilities that might unbalance it and make it not very fun for the other players around them, which is the biggest thing. Argument about people being OP or overpowered or min-maxing or something. It's not really that individual. It's that individual amongst others in the game, and unbalancing the ability to be effective in the game and having fun, and being important to the plot or what have you. So, but get away from that. We're talking about monsters and creatures and stuff. So let's get towards the big bads, right? Let's get towards like dragons, fiends, celestials. Right off the bat, like celestials and fiends absolutely, to me, seem like the light and dark side of like clerics and paladins. If you just want to go straight, straight alignment powers, boom, you need the head of a clerical order or a legendary paladin, or on a warlock styled NPC on any spectrum of the alignment motivational range. You can absolutely use fiends and clerics, or using them as like the great heroes of the world, and using them as challenges. So for example, if you have player characters that just happen to be murder hobos, or they like playing evil type, there could be one or more, or a cadre of these knights that roam the countryside, enforcing law and order, and they could be divas or planetars or solars or any kind of like celestial being in stats and abilities, but they are just very powerful, noble people. You can use smaller versions of them, like the winged serpent Quaddle, or a Sphinx, or I think it's a guardian Naga, and I'm just pulling this off the top of my head. I don't recall for certain, but if you want to use some of those good aligned monsters like storm giants or something, but they're just wasting space in your monster book, turn them into NPCs as people, and absolutely, to protect yourself and to be consistent in your world, foreshadow these great and powerful abilities by your NPCs to your player characters. Let them have some kind of this legendary status in your world, so that your first through fifth level characters don't think they can just push these people around when a planetar knight pulls out their weapon. But again, we don't have to stick with the direct, okay, it's a celestial, it must be good, or it's a fiend, it must be evil. Using the above example, like Live and Let Dice said about a shamanistic ritual, a fiend does not need to necessarily be evil if you're just reshaping it. So for example, there could be this tribe, and the shaman has the abilities of like a devil or something from the abyss, and is able to use those powers, and maybe those powers each represent something from nature. So instead of it having a tail that lashes out, it is a living vine. Instead of being able to summon fire, maybe there's flammable methane gases that come up from the swamps. Instead of an aura of fear, well, yeah, there could be just an aura of fear from the shaman to keep outsiders away from their community. So maybe instead of the fear, maybe there are these like shadowy creatures that seem to come out of the darkness and intimidate everyone. Christy Rand says the TV series Lucifer. Absolutely, Lucifer plays a air quotes human being with great powers. So in this instance, you could have either very mortals with those abilities, or they take on a mortal shape, of course, and they still have those powers. So maybe there are people who worship dragons as their demigods, and along their path towards their worship of these beings, or maybe towards their move towards godhood, they take on one or more abilities of a dragon. Live and Let Dice says doppelgangers could just be a legendary assassin class this way. And how if you are a Game of Thrones fan, this makes perfect sense, right? The faceless ones could just, hey, we're not going to make up new abilities. They're just got doppelgangers. But in this world, you can train to become a quote unquote doppelganger, this, giving them, they become the faceless man, and therefore they're these special abilities. And this is a great excuse to use all those creatures you don't get a chance to use very often in your world. So like doppelgangers, intellect devourers, ogre magi or oni, rakshasa. These could all be class functions, and of course they are so unique and so specialized that the player characters don't learn these abilities, but they can, when they come in contact with those communities, they find out that there are these things, and you can even give little hints of how they incorporate into the culture. So using the Game of Thrones idea, maybe there is this shadowy organization of the faceless man, and everyone talks to them about them, but no one really believes it. Or maybe people talk in hushed tones, and if you say the wrong things about the wrong people, everyone's like, shh, if you're not careful, the faceless man will come and take your soul. And everyone's like, what, really? I don't get that. And then to make things even more interesting, using the doppelganger idea, maybe like the doppelganger is about the same level as the player characters. And here's a great idea: for one of the player characters gets killed, and then you just slip a note to the person that gets killed and like, no, you're not dead. And you just say, no, you're playing a doppelganger. You're playing your character, but you're a doppelganger, and you've been trained. This is like training for them. You've just been away for a while. And that would be a really great way for one of your players who isn't able to join very often, and you don't, you're like, well, keeping track of class levels and leveling up, and I wish I could just give them a creature and let them play that, but that would be kind of odd because we're playing more of like a humanistic world. The perfect way to get that person that wants to play but is unable to join in and go, here's a Minotaur stat block, here's a basilisk stat block, here's a doppelganger stat block, here's a Rakshasa stat block. You're playing that person, but you're playing, they represent a particular culture in your world. And a lot of those creatures come from our own real world cultures, whether it's like Persian or deep African or far, Asian cultures or islander cultures and things. And so using those elements by mixing in their abilities, just like using Jinn or Freet as class abilities, using any number of abilities. My brain just left on me. Of course, you have your powerful creatures, but you could even step up some of the abilities as the player characters confront better trained individuals. So, for example, amongst a dragon's got like your breath weapon. They've got a tail attacks. They've got claws. They've got wings. And so maybe only specific people in the community have those things. So, for example, let's say that it's a gnomish community and that they are tinkerers, but you're like, I don't know what to create for them. I'm just going to use a white dragon. So they live in this Arctic region. They've survived here for a long time. So maybe some of them have these winged contraptions that they fly around on the Arctic winds. And so some have the ability to fly like a dragon. And then there are others that use, frost cannons or something from the parapets of their storm laden home, blizzards or something. And then there's more that use like, even though they're smaller folk, maybe they use these powerful staves with claws on the end, or they use these ice knives that they forge out of a cold forge, and they use those to attack people. Or maybe the capabilities of the dragon are actually just constructs that are able to move, and so maybe 2 or 3 of them actually pilot these large, very broad constructs, and they sit in the chest and head. And so instead of them being dragons, they're actually able to to walk as a humanoid, or maybe they look like spider type creatures that have those abilities. But of course, off the top of the head, if you're stuck, you can actually grab one, and you might have to fudge things a little bit and to get it to fit. But if you've got hours or days or months to add this into your world, it could be a very easy shorthand to go, let's see, assassins from the port city of Galamar, doppelganger. The shaman tribe of the swamplands of the, I don't know, Dream Mists. Let's see. Let's write down giant python. That kind of thing. Also, if you want to make people, hags are excellent sources of transforming people from one thing to another. So maybe there's a hag who like serves hag's milk, and the hags are able to like people who go to the hags and either trust the hags because they're part of the community. They buy the hag's milk that allows them to transform, or the hag is just another shaman in their world. And so insect swarms, oozes, other creatures like mimics that can shape change as well. Maybe they are also class features. And so in a pinch, the human beings are able to become these like almost mystic type individuals that can pass through walls or small openings or something. Oh shit, here we go. Jared says Hound Archon Paladin, Minotaur Barbarian, a Spell Weaver Wizard, Medusa Rogue, yeah, absolutely, Fairy Sorcerer, all right, Harpy Ranger, Gargoyle Fighter, Lamia Cleric. All right, let's go up to the top. All right, Hound Archon Paladin, right? Not only are they a paladin out in the field, with their armor, but I can imagine them not necessarily being like glittered armor, but little like almost dirty, like they like a real hound, right? Their armor is gray, maybe it looks like it's iron, it's got stains, and they are down and dirty. They go hunting for enemies. Oh yeah, they're noble and whatnot, but when they plant their banner, they're ready to get their hands dirty. A Minotaur Barbarian, absolutely. And what a great way to show like a barbarian horde where they, instead of like a Minotaur's horns, they rush and tackle their opponents like a barbarian horde, knocking them down, maybe doing flying kicks, jumping on them, using their hammer or their axe or their shield, and just smashing people as they run past them and knock them down. Spellweaver Wizard. I'm trying to think of Spellweavers. Oh, my brain is leaving me about the Spell Wizard. I'm going to hold off on that. The Medusa Rogue, absolutely. So a rogue with the Medusa's ability not only can have daggers with poison, which would represent the snakes in the hair, but also the petrification ability. Maybe they have this one concoction that they're able to drip in the mouth of their victim, or cut a wound and it turns green and they can't move, and then the rogue like whispers in their ear threats. A Fairy Sorcerer, absolutely, could even be Fey touched or Fey taught, or just has those abilities. A Harpy Ranger could flit through the trees. I'm not sure. No, sirens can charm people, but a ranger that has maybe a feathered cloak, and they train to be able to almost have like a gliding ability, or maybe they can change themselves into a flying creature to go after or hide from other adversaries. Gargoyle fighters, yes, they have like supernatural vigilance, and when they fold their arms and stand up a parapet, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's raining or snowing or anything, it's hot or cold, they stand there ready with their blades on their sides, and they will not be daunted. And of course, a Lamia Cleric, both helping but they might be a little bit tricky, you know? Final Wolf says, I love using goblins as traders and thieves in my cities and as tinkerers in moral opposition to gnomes. Yes, absolutely. And we're not just talking about like the actual creatures, but we're just talking about like here you have a problem. You're like, man, I don't want to go through the problem of writing down class abilities for all my NPCs. What do? Just take a stat block and just reskin it as a humanoid or human or humanoid person and just turn them into a culture in your world. And then on a 3x5 card, you just write down, okay, traders, and just put in parentheses goblins, thieves in the city, goblins, whatever, tinkerers or something. What's another great one that you can really get some fuel out of? Like, lastly, you could also have this thing where the people and the creature have such a relationship that in one part of your world, going all the way back to the top with like displacer beasts or basilisks or something like that, or even like the Medusa rogue idea, which I really love. The gargoyle fighters, I love that idea as well from Jared. It's possible that these people want to ascend to that. So in one part of the world, gargoyles are hated. They're hunted down. I mean, they're just evil. You just kill them. But in this part of the world, gargoyles have a profound respect amongst the humans or the humanoids. And when I say humanoids, I'm talking racial types like elves or dwarves or gnomes or tieflings or something like that. And so maybe there's this honored respect. Like the gargoyles are fed. The gargoyles are given protection. They are desired to be at the top spires of the city. Lower down, they're just fighters. They're human fighters. They learn to fight like them. They've always trained like them. They've learned to have these abilities where they, instead of like long swords, they fight with these shorter, scrappier swords. And instead of like regular cloaks, they have these like could be constructed contraptions that they either grab very quickly, or their shields are like tower shields, but they're made from like a hide that allows them to move around the city very quickly. Jared says, it makes sense that if you had monstrous creatures, they would dominate a lot of aspects of society. And then Prue pops her head in. What's going on? And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And then here you can kind of play with the ethics or morality of your world. So, for example, gargoyles can be absolutely positively evil in your world, period. They're chaotic evil. They go around, they start slaying everything, except in the, desert cities of Thangar or something like that, right? In this desert city, the gargoyles can go down there. They get protection. They're evil, but they don't, just because you're evil doesn't mean that you always bite the hand that feeds you. Literally or figuratively. And these people may know that gargoyles are evil, but they're okay with them as long as they go and fight their enemies. They don't care. And so there could be this coalition, this blending of culture and creature. Jared says, for example, a bunch of humans can build stuff at a standard rate, but imagine if a giant joins their construction guild. Exactly. And so there's a possibility that maybe people are separated by blood or ancestry over time, or the giants need human beings for the detailed work, or maybe even because the humans have a greater legacy of transferring knowledge that the giants maybe don't have, or maybe it has to do with birth rates, right? Human beings, breed like viruses, but giants don't breed very often. And so there's this symbiotic relationship between the two. Live and Let Dice says troglodytes would make excellent ranger, wilderness roaming NPC classes. Absolutely. And maybe the troglodyte, I believe troglodytes have like are known to have a nasty vomitous scent to them. So instead of this like nasty scent being on their skin, maybe they use herbs and spices and things and grind them up in these little using a mortar and pestle. They grind up the scent, and the scent either is cloying and is very disruptive to the senses. So when they smell it, they're just, they know that their enemies will be distracted by it, or maybe the scent is very pleasant. And so this pleasant scent is distracting because it is almost fey-like. It's like, oh, I smell this thing and I'm distracted because maybe I'm reminded of my past or reminded of a loved one. And then, I've just gotten distracted, and boom, they get a knife in the back, and these rangers move off into the wilderness. So absolutely, you could just reskin here. Here's the idea of taking your monster stats, your monster books, and then now you have another layer, right? Now they are character classes in your world. These are now have become different people in your world. And of course, they don't have to match physicalities. Like I was saying, Prue Prue says, gotcha. Appreciate pheromones. Yeah, absolutely, right? So if maybe a creature smells or seems funny, like plant-like creatures. Plant-like creatures like a yellow musk or violet fungus or something could be people who are able to use the foliage around them and use the pollen or the nectar from trees and flowers and plants, and then use that as a weapon or weaponized ability. For example, a yellow musk creeper turns the musk gets in people, kills it, and then they become zombies. That could be used by a tribe to punish their enemies. That, hey, you attack us, we will spray the stuff in your face, and now you'll just become an undead guardian for us. And by the way, you now are eternally in our favor. Final Wolf says, what thoughts do you have about using undead in this way? Ghosts or ghouls could be interesting, and I think undead are often played out or out boringly. And Living Let Dice says something similar. Undead would make for super interesting heretical clerics. Right. So, okay. So undead, there's tons of undead, but they do kind of get played out. So the undead itself could be its own order of not necessarily good, not necessarily evil, but they could be their own order of like necrotic warriors. So ghosts and wraiths and wights could be like your more shadowy figures, your ninjas. They can pass through walls. They are trained to they can touch you and interrogate / steal your memories, which is kind of their way of like taking your thoughts and dreams. Jared says ghosts can be like memory holograms. They can be the lingering desires and unfinished work of dead NPCs, a great way to convey secret information to the players. And it could be that the undeadness of their power isn't unwanted, right? They are able to transcend their life by slowing down their life force so that they appear to be dead, like the like going into stasis, like a ninja could. Living That Dice says vampires or devourers could be a heretical zealot purging sinners of their life force. And there are, there's the idea of people who are cannibals, living off of sacrificing human beings for their blood to gain their power. Also, imagine, if you will, Hashishans from the original Assassins. They take something into themselves that turns them into unstoppable warriors, right? So it's 28 days and 28 weeks later. So instead of them being undead, they just do not feel pain, right? These are warriors that are like, I'm going to sacrifice myself to protect the community. So they take something, and now no matter what, you hack them up, you stab them with a sword, you cut their throats, they are still coming after you because they do not feel pain at all. And yes, they could be killing themselves or throwing themselves as zealots, but as skeletons and zombies, maybe they are still alive, but this is a one-way trip for them to defend their community. And so the minute they take this concoction, maybe their eyes start to bleed, or there's a purple you know, smudge in their mouth where it just starts to pour out of their mouth, and you know, this person just swallowed down the blood zealots concoction or something. These people are all going to come after us, and we need to stop them. There's no way. There's no communicating with them. There's no parlaying with them. What are some other undead creatures? A lich is a lich. A lich could be a wizard. That doesn't really mean anything. But vampires, wraiths, ghosts, there's some other ones that I'm not thinking of that have like a necrotic touch. Yeah, Prue says, "Witness me." Like, for example, these people could they could live in and amongst many people in a community, and they don't necessarily have to be like a rampaging horde, right? They are in and amongst the public, and people. Oh, a banshee. Yes, a banshee. The scream of a banshee that can literally yell the very soul, destroy the very soul from their sound. And a banshee doesn't need to scream. Imagine, if you will, a chorus or revenants. There we go. But imagine a chorus of people who are singing this angelic sound. But if you listen to this sound too long, you'll just lose yourself. Literally, your soul will just leave your body. It could be the angelic sound is so powerful, people will sit there and listen to it, to the banshee song, and then they will forget to eat, they'll forget to sleep, and essentially their heart will forget to beat in their very chest as they are pulled to transcend to this greater realm, this outer realm or something. The undead could very well be servants of like a Cthulhu type being from another world, and this culture is so powerful, no one really wants to fight against them. So they're tolerated in the cities, but they are not wanted, because everyone knows you harm one, you harm them all. And when they come in force. So now here's the idea. You have this stalemate. The cult is getting larger, and the people don't want the cult around, but the cult maybe supplies some form of knowledge or protection or what have you, and has been protecting them for maybe very, very many generations. But now the cult is getting out of hand. They're recruiting the firstborn sons and daughters of the populace. They are becoming more and more sacrificial and suicidal in the actions of their devotees. So instead of having to go through like a blood rite, and maybe they have scarification on them, maybe they are killing their own members, and people don't like it, but they're not sure what to do. Living Let Dice says, not sure what a mummy could be skinned as. I turned a mummy one time into a kind of like a bliss zombie-like people. So mummy rot is something that where you get touched, you cannot heal, and eventually once your hit points are gone, you become a mummy from the rot. So let's flip it around, and let's say that there are these people that heal you. They are like they are consumed with pure bliss. So if you hurt them, like a mummy is tough. If you hurt them or something, they don't feel pain. They just have smiles on their faces. But when they caress you, you gain hit points. And then instead of losing all your hit points, so let's say you have 50 hit points, you go to 0. Instead, you go the opposite way. When you reach 100, you become one of them, right? And that actually might be a strange kind of thing where the player characters are like, oh, these people are giving me extra hit points, but why do I feel so good? And why do I trust what they say? And then it could be the opposite way. You could play with that a little bit. Also, mummies are very tough, and it could be that they could be a warrior class that fights with weapons that have a poison in them, or maybe they have the ability to attack pressure points that prevent you from healing your hit points until you're just taken out by them. So they could have like a really gangrenous type of poison on their weapons, and they use that very often. Jared says there's some obscure undead like Bodox they have a death gaze, Crypt things which have forced invisibility, silence, and paralysis inflicted, and then Gasho Gasha Dakoru, which is a starvation aura. I'm slightly familiar with the Bodox. The Crypt things I've heard of, and I couldn't remember their abilities, so I didn't want to bring that up. And Gasha Dakoru, I'm probably butchering the name. I don't remember them at all. But one or more or all of them can be layered. And of course, you don't need to reveal that they are undead at all in any way. Now, what you may want to do to keep things in parity, right? You want to, if you take one of my general rules is like give and take. So if you give something, you take something away. If you take something, you give something back. So for example, if you use undead and you reskin them, you're probably going to have to name them something else. Prue says starvation aura. Please elaborate. Sounds cool. Which actually I agree with that. You know, just type it in if you can elaborate or if you have the ability to do that. So so before that comes up in the chat, instead of labeling them as undead, you can label them as something other in your world. So they could be aberrants, they could be fiends, they could be fae, so that you are not taking away the ability of, let's say, a cleric in your world, or a cleric player character's ability, but you are now layering it with something else. So maybe instead now the ranger has an ability to fight them, just to make some kind of parity in their abilities. And of course, you can always take away, if you take away the undead, you can also take away some of their immunities too, right? So if they're humans, they still have to breathe, they still have to eat. Maybe they're still vulnerable to poisons and things, which most undead are completely immune to. Final Wolf says there is always the Wendigo, similar in that they are about never-ending hunger and they have a cold aura. Wendigo, Yeti, they have like this ability where they have like super stealth. They have this cold aura about them. So there could absolutely be a community where these warriors are trained to go out into the wilderness, and those that survive, into like the Arctic regions, and those that survive actually bring some of this back with them, this cold that they're able to generate in their body, and they're unstoppable. They're like the ultimate Arctic rangers, going just with a loincloth, some polar boots from a polar bear they slayed, and a piece of petrified dagger or ice dagger or something, or what have you, and they are done. And they are could be some of the wildest, most evil, barbarians around. And of course, they don't have to be massive. They could be very thin, like elven-like or something like that. And they're therefore changing around who they are, what they can do. Jared says, Gasha Dakoru is a giant Japanese skeletal creature that is created when a town dies from famine. They roam the country in their starvation to get revenge. Google Gasha Dakoru Pathfinder. And it could be that kind of what we talked about before in another Monster Monday, where a curse, the player characters think of it as a curse, or when they encounter it, it is a curse. But in this community, it is part of their culture, their blood. So if a town, like for example, using this creature, when a town dies from famine and this creature becomes that, it is a possibility that, let's say the local, a rival king or a rival community starved the city out, and the last survivor becomes this Gasha Dakoru, and to take revenge on the neighboring community that starved them out in the first place. Like, hey, my community's dead. I am this creature on purpose. I have these abilities on purpose to take you out and take you down. And it could be that they were starved for a particular reason. Maybe the king had to make a hard choice. Okay, I can either try to feed everyone and we all starve, or I can let the small community starve to save everyone here, you know. And for good or bad, maybe the choice is just wrong in the sense of someone had to go, and the king maybe feels guilt and is hunted by this creature. Jared says, try Googling Gashadokoro in Goblin image search. Very cool art. Gashadokoro. I'm terrible. My damn stateside accent is so lazy. Anyway, we're almost hitting on the hour mark. Thanks for joining me. Yes, these I don't even know if you call them videos anymore. They're more like a podcast almost, of video cast, vlogcast or something. So a ton of ideas. Oh, Final Wolf says, have you spoken about dragons in this context? I've had many players express the desire to play as or somehow become a dragon. Yes, I did mention it. I didn't go very deeply into playing a dragon, but yes, I was talking about using dragons as like a multiple class type feature, stepping up a little bit at a time, so that maybe a few have the abilities like the dragon's scales as maybe armor or toughness, using the dragon's claws or tail as weapons, and then going higher into their wings and their breath weapon, and maybe even some of their magic. But yeah, we're hitting that hour mark. Thank you guys very much. I'm going to go into my my self-promotion period here, so you guys can take it easy. So I'm going to end it right here. I'm going to stop the chat at this moment and just talk about what it is I do, who I am, and what's going on. I'm DBJ. I'm a contributing writer to Critical Hit Publishing. We have coming out something called Adventure Keys. They're only 3 or 4 pages long in content. They are micro adventures with a ton of options, and those options can be purchased. I'm going to say bye to my lovely wife. Bye, baby. Bye. Have a good one. When you get off there. Absolutely. Within the next 20 minutes. Absolutely. Love you. Love you. All right, now. Yeah, it's very early in the morning here. 6 in the morning, of course, 6 to 7. So lastly, Adventure Keys are coming out. We have one available on DriveThruRPG. All that information is going to be below if you just tag on anything. And you can join us over on Critical Hit Publishing. Myself, Alex, and Rob are part of Critical Hit Publishing. And my baby is the cinematic environs. Third Pillar Thursdays are my favorite. Oh, I love using the environment, that third pillar of exploration. But anyway, that's it. Look for the Adventure Keys as well. And the next book in his cinematic environs is coming out soon. Plains and Grasslands, some of the most boring area taken, transformed, twisted by me, using the very technique that I do in my videos, which is to break down things over and over again into like this weird minutia, this mix, this miasma of like strange ideas, and then organizing them, and then turning into a great, essentially a great idea at the end. So yes, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you. I'm DBJ, your dread-headed DM. Everyone have a very great day. I'll see you tomorrow at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for Tips and Tricks Tuesday.